Okay, we're going to look at some essentials for Illustrator and just acquaint ourselves with how it works. So the difference between Illustrator and Photoshop is that really Illustrator is for drawing um, and drawing directly into the program. And it's different from Photoshop in that it deals with what we call vectors, which are essentially flat graphics and things that are traced between anchor points and paths, whereas Photoshop is really for images and pixels, so pixel editing. Um, and so there are certain things that Illustrator does really well. So it doesn't really rely on resolution, image resolution, because it's vectors, it can be scaled. And so you can make things quite big and quite small and export them at your desired resolution. And whereas Photoshop actually doesn't do the flat stuff very well, it does, but when you scale things, they tend to become grainy and lose resolution if you've done them at a certain size. So a crude definition is your Illustrator is for drawing logos, logo type graphics that can be scaled, whereas Photoshop will be for your image work and your image editing, some graphical work, but you have to work at the correct resolution when you start. Okay, so with thinking about drawing in mind, there are two ways to draw in Illustrator. We can use the freehand tools which are available to us, which are the most obvious. And so, for instance, we can select a brush here, and we can just start to paint lines, etc. This is quite easy. And we also have a pencil tool which does the same sort of thing. Okay. And we can choose with the freehand tools different brushes. So in here you'll see I'm in the painting mode at the moment, so the workspace for painting. And I can just choose a different brush here and I can paint with that. If I go to the paintbrush tool here, and away I go. And I can also choose different brushes after the fact by selecting the line. Okay, so if I just paint this brush here, I can use Illustrator to select and move things around quite quickly, which is nice. And we can resize things quite fluidly on the stage, which you can sort of do with Photoshop now, but not as well. So once you've got something on the paper and you want to move it, you'll see that there's two arrows at the top. So we have this, the black arrow here is the selection tool, and that allows you to then just select a line and resize it or rotate it or scale it, as we're doing here. And to do that, we're just going to the corners and scaling or pushing. And then we also have this direct selection, which allows us to actually go further in. And you'll see when I'm clicking on a line here, there's various points inside the line which are called anchor points. And this direct selection allows us to actually get involved in and go and push and pull these things around. So at the moment that seems odd, but that'll become, using the direct selection tool will become clearer in a minute. So we've got our freehand tools and various brushes and bits and pieces in here that we can use. I want to just select and get rid of all of those together. I can just take the selection tool, click and drag over everything so it's all selected at once. If I wanted to, I could scale all of that like this. So I can click and drag everything, scale it down, or scale it up. So you can see this is quite a quick way of working. I can also select everything and delete it. Okay, so the other way of doing it, drawing in directly into Illustrator, is to use kind of what we call primitive shapes. And you'll notice in the tool palette here we have a square. And if I just click and hold on that, you'll see that I have various other shapes that are open to me. So if I just click on that icon and then go to the edge there to the arrow, I can open up this whole palette. And I have a range of fairly basic shapes that I can use here, so like a polygon and a star, which I can click and drag and draw out a shape. And if I wanted to do shapes in different colours with different strokes, I can just double click this here, we go. Have no stroke. Click and drag a square out here in red. And away we go. I can also just double click on the surface and it will say, do you want to do the same rectangle as before, 108 by 85? Click OK, and there we go. Okay, so I can decide what color I want by just clicking this color picker. This square here is the fill, so I can choose black. And let's just say this one with the hole in it is what we call the stroke. So here I'm going to have a black inside and a red stroke or outline. Click and drag that, you can see I've got that here. Okay, now using the selection and direct selection tools, I can do what I did before, which is I can use the selection tool to rotate and to compress things or to expand them. Okay, and I can also use the direct selection tool. This is where it gets interesting, to actually take anchor points and to move them. And this is where you start to see possibilities for making a wider range of unique shapes. So when we look at the shapes, there aren't many options, but actually once you start to work with them, you can change anchor points and reshape them and then stick them together and you've got a range of new shapes. Another tip for working with shapes, I'll just get rid of these stars and polygons here. When you click and drag out a shape, like a polygon for instance, if I click and hold and then use the down arrow on the keyboard, I can have fewer edges and corners, and if I click up and drag while I'm going, I can have more. You can see I've got more sides. This is more evident when I use the stars. So here I've got many sides. Click and drag. Down arrow gives me 3, up, and away we go. Okay. So that's by using the down and up arrow. Another good thing about Illustrator is we can work quite quickly to duplicate things and to set them side by side and to have like a workflow. So if we're developing a logo or an icon and we just want to have 5 versions and see different colors, what we can do is just do it with this style, is do our first version, and then if I hold down the Option key on the keyboard, you'll see my cursor changes to a white and black arrow. And then if I hold down Shift at the same time, so here's my Option key, and then hold down Shift, I can drag out and it will put it exactly on the same line. Then if I use Command and D, I can repeat. And actually, you can then start to do, so you can do it as logo types, or if you want to, you can just do this, and I can do it as a, I'm going to start with a pattern. And then I can just go in and try different colours. If I just switch those around. So it's really quite quick, and you can use it for all sorts of things. One other thing you can do, so let's just say we're interested in making a logo, but we want something that's, you know, like a teardrop shape or something. We can go in and use our circle tool, and just to explain how this works, if we get this colour here. So how Illustrator works is it basically plots what we call a path between anchor points, and in this case our path is between 4 anchor points. So we start here, perhaps go up to the top, then it comes down to here, and that gives us a perfect curve. Now with the direct selection tool here, remember we can actually move certain anchor points, so we can go in and make this sort of shape. If I hold down shift, it will give me essentially a line thing. And then using the technique we just did, so I can go to the direct selection, the selection tool just then. I can use Option to click and drag and go up like this. And I can choose a different colour. Okay, and so quite quickly you can see a way of doing logo type stuff. I can also then just tweak that. And I can think about opacity, so just up here. You can start to get some interesting things. Okay. I can also rotate things around a certain point. So if I take this shape again, for instance, I can make a shape and rotate it around a certain point on that curve and make a concentric pattern. So here you can see I've got a rotate tool. I'll just click somewhere. See, it will rotate around that point. So here, if I click here, it will rotate around that point. Okay. And so I can start to rotate. I can hold down the duplicate thing, so the Option again. And then I can do Command D. If I wanted to, I could make those all outlines. And quite quickly you can see, let's make that darker so you can see that. A bit bigger. You can start to make some really interesting illustrative things. So we can draw directly, and we'll do more of that in a minute. We can use the primitives, but crucially we can get in there and reshape them using the direct selection and selection tools, but then also duplicate and rotate using various things, and that gets us beyond the basics.